May 8, 1945. Berlin, just before midnight. The rain falls lightly over the ruins, not enough to wash away the ash. Not enough to cool the twisted metal still warm beneath the boots of men who have survived too much. In the shattered streets of Berlin, Soviet soldiers move cautiously through collapsed buildings, rifles slung low, boots crunching glass and brick. Somewhere nearby, a radio crackles. Its signal distorted but unmistakable. Germany has surrendered. The war in Europe is over. For nearly 6 years, the world has been consumed by fire. Cities erased, nations broken, tens of millions dead. And now, at last, the shooting has stopped. A young Red Army sergeant pauses near the Reichstag. He lights a cigarette with shaking hands. The flame flickers in the night air. He exhales slowly, watching the smoke drift upward into the darkness where anti-aircraft guns once screamed. He does not cheer. He does not celebrate. He looks west. Across the Atlantic, church bells ring. In New York, crowds flood Times Square. Strangers embracing, laughing, crying, dancing in the streets. Newspapers are waved overhead. Sailors climb lampposts. For the first time in years, people allow themselves to believe something extraordinary. Peace. In Washington, President Harry S. Truman addresses the nation with careful words. He speaks of victory, of sacrifice, of the long road ahead. But behind his measured tone lies a weight he cannot share. Because Truman knows something most of the world does not. The war may be ending, but the struggle for the future has already begun. In London. Winston Churchill Soar walks alone through a quiet corridor in 10 Downing Street. The cheers from earlier in the day still echo faintly in his ears. Britain has survived. Barely. The empire is exhausted. The economy is broken. And yet, Churchill's thoughts are not on Germany. They are on Moscow, on the armies that now occupy half of Europe, on promises made, and promises already being bent. Further east, in the Kremlin, Joseph Stalin listens to reports in silence. The Red Army stands victorious from the Baltic to the Balkans. Warsaw, Budapest, Vienna, Berlin, cities liberated and controlled by Soviet force. 27 million Soviet citizens are dead. Entire regions of the USSR lie in ruins. And yet, Stalin does not see triumph. He sees vulnerability. He sees a future where gratitude fades quickly, where allies remember fear faster than friendship. The alliance that defeated Nazi Germany was never built on trust. It was built on necessity, and necessity has an expiration date. April 25, 1945. Torgau, Germany. On the banks of the Elbe River, American and Soviet troops meet for the first time. An American lieutenant steps forward, hand extended. A Soviet officer mirrors the gesture. Cameras click. Smiles are exchanged. A translator struggles to keep up as words spill out. Congratulations, relief, disbelief that they have survived long enough to meet. For the photographers, it is a perfect image. For history, it is something else entirely. Because as the soldiers pose for the camera, the line they are standing on will soon become a border, and borders have consequences. Or, the soldiers don't know it yet, but their governments do. February 1945. Yalta Conference, Crimea. The room is warm. Too warm. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, visibly weakened by illness, sits wrapped in blankets. Churchill puffs on a cigar. Stalin watches them both with unreadable eyes. Maps cover the tables. Translators stand ready. Pens hover above paper. This is where the future of the world is being negotiated. Officially, they speak of peace. Unofficially, they speak of control. Poland is discussed at length. Elections are promised. Freedom is guaranteed, at least on paper. Eastern Europe is described as liberated, though no one can quite agree on what that word means. The Red Army is already there. That fact changes everything. Roosevelt believes cooperation can continue after the war. He believes institutions can prevent conflict. He believes that reason will prevail. Churchill is less certain. Stalin is already planning for the next phase. By the time the conference ends, the press releases are optimistic. The private notes are not. April 12, 1945. Warm Springs, Georgia. Franklin Roosevelt is dead. The man who held the Allied coalition together is gone. Replaced by Truman, a former senator thrust suddenly into the most dangerous office on earth. Within days, Truman is briefed on a project so secret that even Roosevelt had shared it with only a handful of people. The Manhattan Project, a weapon of unprecedented power, a weapon that will change how wars are fought and whether they can be survived at all. In July 16, 1945, Alamogordo, New Mexico, 5:29 a.m. The desert becomes daylight. The ground shakes. The air burns. A fireball climbs into the sky, silent and terrifying. Scientists shield their eyes. Soldiers stand frozen. Some cheer, others feel sick. The atomic bomb works. At that moment, the United States holds a power no nation has ever possessed. And somewhere, far away, Soviet intelligence officers are already writing reports. Stalin is informed quietly. He does not react. He does not need to. He already knew. Soviet spies have been watching the project for years. The alliance is now built on a lie. July-August 1945. Potsdam Conference. Truman arrives confident. He hints at a new weapon without revealing its nature. He expects leverage. Stalin listens politely. He gives nothing away. The atmosphere is colder than Yalta. The smiles thinner. The agreements vaguer. Germany will be divided. Reparations will be taken. Occupation zones are finalized. But beneath the formal language, something else is happening. Each side is counting. Troops, territory, influence. The war against Germany is ending. The competition for the world is beginning. In August, Hiroshima disappears in a flash of light. 3 days later, Nagasaki follows. Japan surrenders. The Second World War is over. The celebrations return. But in Moscow, the lesson is unmistakable. The United States is willing to use this weapon. And if the Soviet Union does not obtain one of its own, it will never be safe again. By the end of 1945, Europe is quiet, but tense. Railways are rebuilt on one side of the continent. On the other, borders harden. Political parties are reshaped. Governments are formed under the watchful eyes of occupying forces. No declaration is made. No speech announces a new war. But the lines are there, invisible, real. The soldiers who fought together begin to return home. The diplomats stop smiling. The intelligence services begin recruiting. And somewhere between celebration and suspicion, the world takes its first step into a new kind of conflict. A war without battlefields. A war without front lines. A war that begins not with gunfire, but with silence. Autumn 1945. Eastern Europe. Early morning. The trains begin to run again. They move slowly at first, their steel wheels screeching against damaged tracks, carrying soldiers home, refugees east and west. Crates of supplies stamped with unfamiliar symbols. On the surface, it looks like recovery. But recovery is never neutral. In Poland, Red Army units remain stationed long after the last German troops are gone. Soviet advisors sit quietly inside government ministries. Communist Party officials, once marginal, now occupy offices with armed guards at the door. Elections are promised. Timelines are vague. Opposition voices grow quieter by the week. No tanks roll through the streets. They don't need to. In Hungary, coalition governments form on paper while security services form in secret. Files are opened. Names are recorded. Wartime collaborators are arrested. Then political rivals. Then anyone who asks too many questions. The method is subtle, legal, incremental, and devastatingly effective. To many in Washington and London, this still looks temporary. After all, Europe is exhausted. The Soviet Union has suffered unimaginable losses. Surely Stalin will eventually pull back. Surely this is about security. Surely it will pass. March 1946. Fulton, Missouri. Winston Churchill steps up to a small podium at Westminster College. He is no longer Prime Minister, but his voice still carries weight. The audience expects a speech about recovery, about unity. Instead, Churchill delivers a warning. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. The phrase lands heavily. It gives shape to something people have felt but not yet named. In Moscow, the reaction is immediate and furious. Stalin calls the speech a provocation, an insult, a declaration of hostility. The last pretense of unity begins to crack. Behind the scenes, the intelligence war accelerates. American and British agencies compare notes, slowly realizing how little they truly know about Soviet intentions. Soviet intelligence, meanwhile, is already embedded deep inside Western institutions, passing secrets, monitoring debates, mapping future conflicts that have not yet been publicly imagined. The war is no longer about armies. It is about information. The winter 1945 through 1946, Washington, D.C. Harry Truman sits through briefings that grow darker by the week. Reports describe political pressure in Eastern Europe, arrests, disappearances, temporary measures that show no sign of ending. One advisor puts it bluntly, Mr. President, if we don't act, the rest of Europe won't have a choice. Truman listens. He remembers the briefings about the bomb, about power, about responsibility, and he realizes something unsettling. Peace did not bring clarity. It brought a decision. On Nucker, across the ocean, Europe stands at a breaking point. Factories are idle. Food is scarce. Winter kills as surely as any army. Communist parties gain popularity not because of ideology, but because they promise order, bread, and stability. Stalin understands this perfectly. Influence does not require invasion when desperation does the work for you. In France and Italy, communist parties surge in elections. In Britain, intelligence officers quietly discuss contingency plans. In Washington, policymakers begin to accept a reality they hope to avoid. The United States cannot retreat. If it does, the vacuum will be filled. And once filled, it will not empty peacefully. By early 1947, the language changes. What was once described as post-war instability becomes strategic threat. What was once cooperation becomes containment, not yet as doctrine, but as instinct. The Cold War has still not been declared. There are no speeches announcing it, no borders formally drawn. But the choices are already being made: aid or abandonment, resistance or retreat, trust or preparation. The guns are silent, but the world is no longer at peace. It is bracing itself. Early 1947, Washington, D.C., before dawn. The city is quiet, but the lights are already on inside the White House. Stacks of reports line the desk. Economic assessments, intelligence summaries, political forecasts from embassies across Europe. Each one tells a different story, but they all point in the same direction. Europe is collapsing, not from bombs, from hunger. In Germany, children scavenge through ruins for coal and scrap metal. Entire cities exist without functioning governments. Black markets thrive. Winter claims lives quietly, one apartment at a time. In Greece, A civil war is tearing the country apart. Communist insurgents, armed and trained with quiet Soviet approval, fight a weak government struggling to hold territory beyond the capital. In Turkey, pressure mounts from Moscow over control of the Bosporus, the narrow waterway linking the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. Diplomatic notes grow sharper. Military exercises appear closer to the border. To Truman's advisors, the pattern is unmistakable. This is not chaos. It is opportunity. On March 12, 1947, Harry Truman steps before Congress. The room is tense. Lawmakers expect another speech about recovery, about patience, about cooperation. Instead, Truman draws a line. It must be the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation. He does not mention the Soviet Union by name. He does not have to. The message is clear. America will no longer wait. The Truman Doctrine is born. It is not a declaration of war. It is something more subtle, a commitment to intervene everywhere. In Moscow, the response is swift. Stalin hears the speech translated line by line. To him, this is no defensive policy. It is an open challenge, an attempt to surround the Soviet Union with hostile states, to undermine governments friendly to Moscow. He orders a tightening of control. Eastern Europe will not be allowed to drift. Not now. Not ever. Within months, communist parties across the Eastern Bloc consolidate power. Coalition governments dissolve. Opposition leaders are arrested, discredited, or forced into exile. Security services expand rapidly, trained by Soviet advisors who know exactly how fragile political transitions can be. What had once been influence becomes structure. What had once been temporary becomes permanent. Then comes the next escalation. June 1947, Harvard University. U.S. Secretary of State George C. Marshall steps to the podium. The speech is calm, technical, almost boring, but its implications are revolutionary. The United States will fund Europe's recovery, not selectively, not conditionally, but comprehensively. Billions of dollars in aid. Food, fuel, machinery, credit. The goal is simple: stability. To devastated Western Europe, the offer is salvation. To Stalin, it is a trap. If Eastern Europe accepts American aid, Moscow loses control. Economic dependence leads to political independence. Independence leads to defiance. Stalin forbids participation. The divide hardens overnight. Europe is no longer just recovering. It is choosing. By the end of 1947, two visions of the future stand opposed. One built on open markets, reconstruction, and political pluralism. The other on centralized control, security through dominance, and ideological discipline. There's still no battlefield, no shooting war, but the front lines are now visible. They run through cities, economies, and governments, through families, through fear. The Cold War is no longer a possibility. It is policy, and the world will never move backward from this moment. On a winter 1947-1948, Berlin. Before sunrise, the city wakes slowly, if it can be said to wake at all. Berlin is still a wound. Streets carved by tank tracks, buildings hollowed by fire, entire neighborhoods reduced to skeletal facades. But beneath the rubble, something far more fragile is being tested: trust. Berlin is supposed to be governed jointly. 4 powers, 4 sectors, 1 city. On paper, the arrangement looks orderly. In reality, it is a pressure cooker. American, British, French, and Soviet officers sit across from one another in meetings that grow shorter and colder by the week. Permits are delayed. Trains are misrouted. Supplies vanish without explanation. Nothing explodes. Nothing officially breaks. But cooperation is dying in slow motion. By early 1948, the Western Allies make a decision. Germany cannot remain frozen forever. Its economy must be rebuilt, its currency stabilized. Without action, hunger and desperation will do what armies no longer can: collapse the center of Europe. So a new currency is introduced in the Western zones, the Deutsche Mark. To the West, it is economic necessity. To Stalin, it is betrayal. June 24, 1948. Without warning, Soviet authorities shut down every road, rail line, and canal leading into West Berlin. Electricity is cut. Coal shipments stop. Food convoys turn back. 2 million civilians are sealed inside the city. The message is unmistakable. Berlin must choose. It didn't. In Washington, panic ripples through the Pentagon. Breaking the blockade by force would mean war. Pulling out would mean surrender. Neither is acceptable. So the Americans try something no one has ever attempted before. They fly. Tempelhof Airport, C-47. Cargo planes roar overhead, landing every few minutes. Pilots fly through fog, snow, and darkness, guided by little more than instruments and discipline. They carry flour, milk, coal, not weapons. Children gather near the runways, counting planes, naming them, waiting for chocolate dropped from the sky by pilots who understand what is really at stake. This is not just logistics. It is symbolism. The Berlin airlift lasts nearly a year. Against expectation, it works. The city survives. And when the blockade is lifted in May 1949, the result is irreversible. Germany will be divided. So will Europe. Within months, the next lines are drawn. In April 1949, the United States and its allies form NATO, a military alliance unlike anything in peacetime history. An attack on one will be treated as an attack on all. For the first time, the Cold War has a shield. Moscow responds in kind. Eastern Europe is bound tighter. Intelligence services expand. Military planning accelerates. In 1949, the Soviet Union detonates its first atomic bomb. The balance shifts again. The monopoly is over. Fear becomes mutual. By the end of the decade, the transformation is complete. The world is no longer recovering from war. It is preparing for the next one. The guns are still silent, but now everyone understands why. Because the next conflict will not begin with marching armies. It will begin with a mistake, a misunderstanding, a moment where restraint fails. And the world has just built the conditions for that moment to happen. Early 1950, Washington, D.C. night. The maps on the wall no longer show recovery plans. They show trajectories. Red arrows, blue arrows, circles marking ranges, timelines measured not in months, but in minutes. Inside the Pentagon, planners speak quietly about scenarios that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. Not if another war will come, but how it will begin and how fast it will end. Because now, both sides possess the same terrible knowledge. The next war cannot be fought like the last one. In September 1949, the United States confirms what it had hoped to delay for years. The Soviet Union has tested its first atomic bomb. The shock is immediate, not because America believed the Soviets were incapable, but because the timeline was wrong. Too fast, too soon. The monopoly that once gave Washington confidence is gone. Power is no longer one-sided. It is balanced. And balance, in this case, does not mean stability. It means paralysis. President Truman listens as advisors argue over responses. More bombs, bigger bombs, a hydrogen bomb. Each proposal carries the same logic. If fear keeps the peace, then greater fear will keep it longer. In Moscow, the calculations mirror those in Washington. Stalin no longer worries about invasion. He worries about surprise. He orders defenses strengthened, airspace monitored, early warning systems expanded. Cities are reshaped around the assumption that one day, without warning, the sky might burn. The Soviet Union prepares not to win a nuclear war, but to survive one. Across Europe, the consequences are already visible. Military bases expand. Conscription returns. Civil defense pamphlets appear in mailboxes. People are told how to recognize a flash, how to lie flat, how to survive the unsurvivable. They follow the instructions because they have no alternative. On June 1950, Korean Peninsula. Then, suddenly, the Cold War stops being entirely cold. North Korean forces cross the 38th parallel. The invasion is fast, coordinated, and brutal. Seoul falls within days. Refugees flood south. The United Nations calls it aggression. The United States calls it a test, because that is what it is, a test of resolve, a test of alliances, a test of whether containment means anything beyond speeches. For the first time since 1945, American and Soviet-backed forces are killing each other directly. Though never officially, never openly acknowledged as such, the fighting is savage, the casualties enormous, and hovering over every decision is the same unspoken fear. What if this escalates? What if someone crosses the line? Mamma, it does not because the war is small, but because everyone understands what lies beyond it. Korea becomes the model for the future. Limited war, proxy conflict, maximum violence under minimum acknowledgement. The Cold War has found its shape. By the early 1950s, the world lives under a strange contradiction. Never before has humanity possessed such destructive power. Never before has it been used so cautiously. Peace is maintained not by trust, but by terror. And terror requires constant vigilance. Intelligence services grow, surveillance expands, suspicion hardens into doctrine. Every movement is watched, every signal analyzed, every silence interpreted. Because in a world where one mistake could end everything, certainty becomes priceless, and certainty is impossible. The Second World War ended with victory. The Cold War continues with fear, a fear that will define generations, shape nations, and push humanity closer to the edge than it has ever been before. And this is only the beginning.